Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's TSPi Public Sector Series 2020 Digital Transformation Program. My name is Steve Winter, and I'm representing TSPi, serving as MC for today's virtual event. As we've all come to learn, technology is constantly evolving. Blink, just for 1 second, and you can miss an entirely new way of doing business. Nowhere is this more evident than in the world of government IT, where the last 5 years have seen cosmic shifts in the way government agencies do business, internally, with other agencies, and with their constituents. COVID-19 has put an even greater strain on agencies to support unprecedented levels of citizen services, unemployment claims, small business loans, and much more. Over the course of the next 3 hours, today's TSPi Public Sector Series will take an expansive deep dive into just that, the tools and technologies that are prevalent right now, all designed to help government agencies improve their ability to support critical missions and deliver services to the citizens of the United States. Today's program will be divided into 4 sections. We'll open with a panel on cloud migration, followed by our keynote presentation from Nicholas Chaland, Chief Software Officer of the U.S. Air Force and co-lead for the Enterprise DevSecOps initiative with the U.S. Department of Defense. The second half of our presentation will feature a panel on application modernization, followed by our final session on DevSecOps. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. As is sometimes the case, technical challenges could well occur. We appreciate your patience if anything interrupts our delivery of this great content. Please ensure that you have our FAQs pulled up should you run into any connection issues. Second, we encourage you to submit questions throughout the morning using the chat option. After the program, we will share with you an event recap with detailed responses to any of your questions. Before we get started, I'd like to first thank our sponsors for making today's program possible. Amazon Web Services, providing on-demand cloud computing platforms and APIs to individuals, companies, and governments on a metered pay-as-you-go basis. Red Hat, one of the world's leading providers of enterprise open source solutions, including high-performing Linux, cloud container, and Kubernetes technologies. Trend Micro, a global leader in cybersecurity, helping to make the world safe for exchanging digital information. Checkmarks, a software security company that integrates automated security technologies into the software development process. And of course, our host, TSPi, a leading technology integrator that designs and implements secure IT solutions to improve efficiency, increase performance, and achieve customer success. As part of this program, we've created a vendor resource center filled with content to help you navigate your digital transformation journey. Please check that out during our spring breaks or download it throughout the course of the morning. I'd also like to thank all our federal government speakers and participants in advance for devoting their time and expertise. Your involvement is greatly appreciated. And now, let's introduce our host for this event, the founder and CEO of TSPi. This gentleman founded TSPi in 2001 with the vision of building an IT firm focused on delivering solutions that produce customer success. He leads efforts to establish the firm's business goals, growth strategy, and identification of emerging technologies and industry trends that impact their customers. Prior to TSPi, our host was instrumental in the development of web acceleration algorithms at an early-stage intelligent content delivery network startup, FastTide. He began his IT career at PSINet, a leading commercial ISP. One of his notable accomplishments at PSINet was the implementation of NASA's high-volume web hosting, including Senator John Glenn's 1998 spaceflight. It was a combination of experiences gained through these positions and the worldwide IT transformation underway due to the internet revolution that served as inspiration for him to start TSPi. So please join me in welcome TSPi's founder and CEO, Vishal Suri. Vishal, welcome. For starters, Vishal, sorry, stepped over you there. Vishal, what was the motivation for TSPi to host this program today?
Yeah, thank you for the opening comments, Steve. And I also want to thank our federal speakers, our participants, and the sponsors who've helped make this event possible. Motivation-wise, we strongly believe that progress requires partnership, and our citizens are best served when peers in the government and industry come together. And that's especially important in the rapidly evolving technology environment, challenges that we've been facing due to COVID. So an open dialogue across the federal environment leads to developing better and faster solutions. So all ideas discussed this morning, I believe, should be central to any organization focused on delivering results to the U.S. citizenry.
Got it. Well, speaking of solutions, and again, without giving away details that our experts plan to share during their sessions, can you tell us why the technologies that are represented during today's panel are so significant?
That's a good question, Steve. We're excited about each of the panels, and each offer a unique perspective on modern technology. Digital transformation requires both an understanding of the potential that new technologies offer and how government approaches investment and implementation. Specifically, we believe cloud-based technologies and DevSecOps have the potential to support fundamentally new models of service delivery.
Great. Now, are these solutions essentially one size fits all? In other words, is this technology appropriate for all government agencies, or, I don't know, is it really more applicable to a select subset of agencies?
I think I can speak on behalf of all the participants of this event that there really isn't a thing as one size fits all. I think each organization has its own unique needs. Generally speaking, initiatives like modernizing federal IT delivery, embracing modern technology solutions, and building for the cloud are common goals across the government. And from that perspective, I think the topics that we're going to be discussing today are going to be right in line.
Good stuff here, Vishal. Thanks. And now it looks like we're ready to begin. So let's start with our opening panel on cloud migration. Our moderator for cloud migration is the founder of his own communications firm and the former editor of Federal Times. A content marketing professional and former award-winning journalist who specializes in helping clients articulate their differentiated value propositions and resonate with public sector audiences, he launched Watkins Communications in 2015 to provide a variety of tailored communication and consulting services to clients in the federal marketplace, offering expertise in all varieties of content platforms, including live events, webcasts, white papers, video, social media, bylined articles, blogs, and issue briefs. He presently serves as Chief Content Officer for Governing Marketing University, a community-based collaborative platform providing training, events, career development, and community building for professionals serving in the public sector marketplace. And so we now turn over the screen to the founder of Watkins Communications, Steve Watkins.
Good morning.
At least I hope we turn over the screen. There he is.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that introduction. And I welcome my panel to join us. We have a terrific panel. Obviously, a lot of what Steve was talking about in terms of how federal agencies are advancing their missions, trying to serve citizens in more digital capacity. At the center of all of that is the cloud. And so our panel this morning to kick off is going to talk about how federal agencies are migrating to the cloud and considerations that federal agencies will need to bear in mind as they continue on that journey. And we have a terrific panel to help us kind of put that in perspective. First off, we have Bob Bond from NIST, who's a cloud computing manager. We have Jamie Baker from Amazon Web Services, senior manager for federal civilian. And then John Clay from Trend Micro, who is director of the Global Threat Communications piece of Trend Micro. What I'd like to do is ask each of you, and we'll go through maybe starting with Bob and then Jamie and John, if each of you could kind of take a minute and just tell us a little bit about your role with your company, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Bond. I serve as the NIST Cloud Computing Program Manager. So in this role, I help to develop the technical goals of the program. We've been doing this for about 10 years now. We kicked our program off in 2010, you may recall. But right now, we have several things that we're looking at. One in general is the development of guidance around SLAs based on the standards that the ISO organization has produced. There's ISO standard 19086, which is a family of standards regarding SLAs and cloud. So that's right. That's what we're doing now. We take the standard and we try to leverage it back into the government. So.
Great. Jamie?
Hi, good morning. So my name is Jamie Baker. I'm in the Amazon Web Services Worldwide Public Sector Division. We focus on helping customers in governments around the world, state and local, as well as federal education and nonprofits. Specifically, I work in our U.S. federal practice, and I support customers in the health, science, and policy vertical. So customers like Health and Human Services, VA and military health, NASA, Department of Energy, as well as our policy, which includes like State Department, USAID, and General Services Administration.
I'm sorry, John, please, first of all, special thank you to John, who's joining us from Colorado at 6 a.m. there. But John, please tell us a little bit about your role with Trend Micro.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. I am the Global Threat Communications Director at Trend Micro. I've been with Trend Micro for 24 years in cybersecurity. And I work with our threat researchers who are out there all over the world looking at all the bad things that are happening in cybersecurity. They're monitoring the underground communities. They're looking at cloud infrastructures. They're looking at our customers' implementations, their networks, trying to just identify and understand what the malicious actors are doing all day long, every day. And then we obviously develop security solutions from the endpoint all the way to the cloud to try and help them defeat these malicious actors that are targeting their networks. So very happy to be here today and look forward to our discussion.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. Our conversation is going to kind of cover four broad categories. We're going to start off talking about kind of federal cloud adoption more broadly, with kind of special emphasis on Jamie with his great perspective from Amazon. Then we're going to switch into what NIST is doing in the way of cloud standards, where we'll talk primarily with Bob. And then we'll get into a lot of the cloud security issues that I know a lot of our federal audience is very concerned with, talking mostly with John on that one. And then lastly, we'll cover a bit more on some of the cloud SLA standards that Bob was referring to earlier. So let's kick it off and talk a little bit about federal cloud adoption more broadly. Jamie, obviously AWS is a huge player in the federal cloud market. What are you seeing in terms of broad trends occurring today with federal cloud adoption, and where do you see that heading?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I was told my microphone might be a little bit weak, so I'm going to do my best to speak loudly.
Sounds good right now.
Okay. So by and large, we see the majority of federal agencies going through similar kind of cloud adoption practices. Largely in the early days, and when I say that, I mean 2010 to 2014. It was focusing on those assets that were already publicly facing, right? So public-facing websites, the low-hanging fruit of being able to just take a website, get it off of an on-prem system, and get it onto a scalable platform like AWS and other cloud service providers. We see that through the last handful of years, many agencies are taking a more enterprise approach, and they're building what I like to refer to as the plumbing to get cloud as kind of a first-class citizen on their network. So what I mean by that is, you've got to get your networking connected. You have to make cloud look like it's physically no different than an on-premises data center would be for the actual end users. You've got to get a flexible procurement vehicle in place so that you're able to take advantage of the variable pricing models and be able to actually do chargeback to the end customers within the agency. And then you have to get governance and compliance in place, and that's largely based on what NIST has done to really make cloud have the same types of controls in place that a federal agency can take those controls, map it to their, the way they would do it traditionally with FISMA. And so there's confidence from the mission owners to be able to leverage a platform like that. And so agencies are really on some sort of part of that journey. We're seeing a lot of, enterprise mass migrations. There's traditionally some sort of defining moment coming up, like a polo contract refresh, or just systems that are in dire need of kind of refactoring, and those are kind of pushed into one of these migration plans. And I think that that's a path that is a model that we've seen progressing for the last few years. And I think in the future, there's going to continue to be that. But I think a lot of it is a lot of the innovation that's happening around access to tools like machine learning and advanced data analytics. These tools aren't being built to run in traditional x86 architectures. And I think that many of the folks that have been hesitant to move to the cloud now realize that this is the platform you have to be on in order to take advantage of these services. And I think that they're going to really benefit a lot and really start catching up with commercial and being able to take advantage of those types of forward-leaning technologies. So those are the kind of the primary drivers. And, I think that, every agency has a cloud strategy. It just depends on where exactly they are in that journey.
That's fascinating. And so as you said, we're seeing much more of an evolution in terms of how federal agencies are thinking about the cloud. They're thinking, we've got to do this as an enterprise, and they're approaching it that way, which makes all the sense in the world. Bob or John, would you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'd like to add that what Jamie mentioned about security is that, in general, and this, we don't try to say cloud has special security with regard to IT systems. We still say these are IT systems which need to be secured. They need to have the proper risk management associated with it, and then you determine your controls based on your risk posture. So yes, cloud, although cloud is newer for people and there are separate challenges, the overall way of looking at your infrastructure should remain the same.
Thank you. So Jamie, one last question in terms of kind of the broad overall cloud adoption. As federal agencies are kind of making this pivot or this shift toward a more enterprise approach to their cloud migration, what are some of the challenges and lessons learned that you might be able to share with us that a lot of agencies might be confronting as they do that?
Yeah, one thing that we've seen is that the agencies that have taken a more aggressive approach to cloud migrations is they don't start with, I mentioned a second ago that oftentimes agencies will say, okay, we need to have a cloud strategy. Let's start with our public-facing websites, or let's do backup and DR, right? Those are traditionally the pretty easy things to do. I found that agencies that take more aggressive approach and say, you know what, we're going to move one of our crown jewel applications in first. That builds a lot of that really rallies the troops, and it ensures that people are taking it seriously. And it takes kind of it takes a CIO oftentimes with some confidence that we're going to be successful in doing this. But it also, what it does is it kind of gets the groundswell going of all the groups within the IT organization to say, we need to make this successful because this application is really critical for the citizens that we're supporting with it. So it almost kind of pulls people forward. And I think one of the other things that I've seen quite a bit is agencies say, we have to have a multi-cloud approach. And I don't think that is a bad idea, right? I mean, I think there's the concept of we can't have everything in one basket. But I think the way that agencies view that is really important because oftentimes they think we have to have a multi-cloud approach from an infrastructure as a service perspective. It's very difficult to find. Cloud professionals who are skilled in one API of a cloud service provider. It's extremely difficult to find a cloud professional who is fluent in the APIs of all the various CSPs. They're almost like a unicorn. So I think when you think about multi-cloud, the best way to do it is to really say, we already are multi-cloud, right? We're consuming this email service from a SaaS perspective, or we use our CRM from this other provider. But I think it's the best way to think about it is you're not going to get the true benefits of a cloud from an infrastructure and platform perspective if you boil it down to the least common denominator of all the cloud service providers. And that's really, what is your virtual machine technology? What is your storage technology? Because then it's just then you've just got kind of the bare bones of what the CSPs can really offer. So I think taking that multi-cloud approach and saying, look at it from the perspective of infrastructure, platform, and SaaS, you'll realize that by and large you have a very strong multi-cloud approach already. So that's just one thing that I've seen is don't think of it as a multi-infrastructure play. Think of it as consumption of various services that are already, cloud-based.
That's great advice, Jamie. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the NIST cloud standards. And before we do that, I would like to remind the audience you can pose some questions for our panel members. The way to do that is to click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and just type in your question and remember to hit submit. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can within our time frame. So let's switch. Jamie, you just earlier talked about the importance of standards, of governance and compliance, and obviously NIST plays a huge role in that. Bob, you're a key player in helping NIST kind of develop those standards. Tell us a little bit more about your role and how that intersects with federal cloud adoption, and maybe give us a sense of some of the key cloud-related documents that NIST has released in recent years that our federal audience should be aware of.
Okay, thank you. In 2014, NIST published a cloud computing roadmap, technology roadmap for the United States government. And in that roadmap, it illuminates 10 requirements to get the government over into cloud quickly, safely, and securely. The first foray into standards happened with working with the ISO organization, and in that foray, we developed a taxonomy and a reference architecture on the ISO level. So that's an ISO standard, and that took several years. Also, they were able to take some of our requirements that we were working on and try to develop standards around that. So in the roadmap itself, which is SP 500-293. You can look that up. There's requirement 3, which has to do with high quality, technically competent SLAs, because at that time we realized that the SLAs were kind of, they weren't really to this quality. There was a lot of hand waving in SLAs, and if you look at some generic SLAs online, you see that they vary back and forth, and there was no real way for us to try to grab them and standardize them. So in the ISO community, we were able to develop a family of standards on SLAs. The first one, 19086-2, describes the several content areas, about a dozen SLA content areas, ranging from performance, accessibility, availability, governance, data information, how you handle your data. And there are aspects of each of those that the audience would be interested in looking at when they start to develop their cloud strategy or RFI, because in general, people have a difficult time to what are all the pieces in cloud. Well, so this document, although it won't give you an answer, it will certainly give you 12 possible pathways that you should be considering when you start looking at cloud. So that's one way of doing that. And then there's also a metric model, the 19086-2, which allows you to then say, well, if I'm going to get something, how much of it am I going to get? Because that's a basic requirement, right? In technical and business activities, if you have a requirement, you need to have some type of metric to ensure and validate that you're actually getting what you asked for. So it gives you a way to describe that. And then, of course, you work with your vendor to see how well they can work with your description and understand your specific requirements. And then just recently, February of this year, we published a NIST document on federating clouds, which also goes back to the NIST roadmap, which was requirement 5. Our document from this year is on a cloud federation reference architecture, NIST SP 500-332. And in that document, that shows how you can create an environment of multiple clouds, akin to what Jamie was saying, but it would be slightly different, that you don't have multiple clouds just sitting and behaving by themselves individually. You can have clouds shift services and data and storage. So if you need some storage from here or you need some services from here, you can be able to combine them. And we're also working with the IEEE on developing a standard around that document. And the ISO document, the ISO folks have also decided to put a standard out on that as well. So they're just in the beginning stages of that, whereas the IEEE is about 3-4 years into their process. So.
Great, thank you, Bob. Yeah. I'd like to follow up on that last one, your special pub 500-332 that you mentioned on the Cloud Federation reference architecture. So basically what that does is it presents reference architectures and taxonomies for federated community clouds, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so can you provide some examples of perhaps what some of the challenges are that agencies have been experiencing when they deploy federated cloud, community clouds, and how this new publication might help them with that?
Okay, well, I can't answer the first part of that. I can only say that if one was about to create a federated cloud, this document does not give technology details, because if we were to give technology details, that would automatically prescribe a solution. Okay, the original NIST cloud reference architecture was an actor and role-based model. So it told the CIO or whoever is interested in getting it, who are the main people in the loop in a cloud environment, right? So back then we had a cloud consumer, a cloud provider, a cloud broker, a cloud carrier as well. So there were, yes. And so that described the roles of each one of these actors in cloud computing. So we took the same path in that we looked at federating clouds, getting multiple clouds to speak to each other. How would that look in an actor role-based model? So we were able to involve a few more actors. We realized that in this type of environment, where you could have clouds at different sites, while you have other things other things are involved with that. Mainly, you have an administrative domain, you have a regulatory environment, so you have to ensure that data that you can use in one place, you may not be able to use in another place, so that sets up some additional security controls. One could envision if you had an autonomous vehicle, let's say, and you were driving in Maryland. When you went over the border to Virginia or Pennsylvania, your car would have to know that it went over the border, and then it would also have to be able to get data from the local servers in that state to know what your rules and regulations that your car has to follow are. So that would be one example of how federated clouds could work. In addition, you could think of a disaster recovery scenario where you have to turn something up fast, and you don't really have all the equipment in your site. So if you were able to turn on a federation of some sort, then your friends or your other colleagues, where it's stable, you would be able to use their information and their resources easily.
Thank you. That's very helpful. You were talking about cars and driving around, which kind of reminded me, we've got a slide up for our audience on an upcoming event that you're involved in. We are kind of starting to get pressed for time, but can you tell us a little bit about this current project that you're working on relating to autonomous vehicles?
Sure. So this current project is about vehicle teleoperation, and you can see from the slide that you have a human in the loop who's operating perhaps a fleet of vehicles. So we think of vehicle teleoperation as something that is going to be part of the mobility ecosystem. We will always have this will share the road with completely autonomous vehicles, but there are different applications and different problems that we face with this. For example, what types of technologies are we really going to need? We understand we're going to need advanced networks, 5G, 6G. How much intelligence do you want to leave on the car? Do you want to have it all on the cloud? Do you want to have it all on the cloud? All on the car. And of course, that line where you draw is going to be different under different situations. So if you are in a place with low network connectivity, you want a lot of the intelligence on the car that it can operate, but it won't have to necessarily send back all the information to the main cloud. It may not need rear view video, for example. But what happens in those cases when you get low network connectivity? What are going to be the safety considerations, and how is this going to be measured? And do we have good standards around those as well? There are a lot of questions we're going to be talking about. We have many people from industry, that are going to be talking about vehicle teleoperation today and tomorrow. I'm also going to be moderating a panel on vehicle teleoperation and infrastructure, where we talk about the role of cloud, the role of AI, edge computing, security as well, along with networking.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Bob. John, let's pivot a little bit to talk more specifically about cloud security. You're hip deep in cloud security issues at Trend Micro. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the federal cloud migration journey today, and specifically the security dimensions around that, and kind of specifically how is perhaps the federal view on security evolving, and where do you see that heading in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The interesting thing about cybersecurity is the malicious actors out there don't really care where your data is. They don't care where your network is. They were going to target you. They don't care if you're in the federal government or if you're in a private sector, right? They are targeting organizations, they're targeting individuals out there. When it comes to cloud, it's kind of interesting. You think about motives, right? If you're a government agency looking to move to cloud, you got to think about what is the motive of a malicious actor to come after me, right? So the couple of things that we're seeing in the cloud specifically, one, they are looking to steal data, first and foremost, right? They want to steal data to either utilize it, extort it, or sell it in the underground market. They're looking for resources to crypto mine. So crypto mining is still a thing, and it still happens out there. Cryptocurrencies are stabilizing in value and still continuing to go up. So they're going to continue to do that action. They also, obviously, espionage is another one, big one for U.S. government, trying to steal secrets, trying to steal information that we're utilizing. And then lastly, and more concerning, is destructive attacks, and the fact that they may look to destroy some of the cloud infrastructures out there to impair what that organization is trying to do. When it comes to how they're doing it, that's the other thing that's quite interesting. A lot of things that they're doing in the normally they do in the cloud. Credential theft is huge. So as you're building your cloud infrastructure and your networks, think about the administrative accounts that are managing those activities, managing the applications. They are going to look to steal the credentials, brute force the credentials, however they can get it. They want to get access to those credentials, because once they do have the credentials of an administrator or a developer, then they are able to do a lot of things, like I mentioned before. They can drop crypto mining malware on the systems. They can drop ransomware on the systems. They can steal data, all of that. The other aspect, and this is the harder part for organizations, is misconfigurations. We see we have an application that helps with misconfigurations, and we see 290 million misconfigurations a day being found by that application across our customer networks. And that is the challenge that a lot of organizations have, especially the ones that are moving to the cloud, because it's all new, right? Technology changes all the time. You think about AWS, for example, just over the last several years, they now have 120 plus applications and services available to an AWS customer. How do you learn all of that in a very short period of time? You think about Kubernetes is pretty new. Docker is new. There's all these technologies that are coming out are all new. So organizations and the federal government have to think about, how do we train our people to understand that? And that's just understanding how to implement it and how to configure it. It's not even thinking about, well, how is it going to be secure? When we look at the new tech, what we try to do is figure out, how are the criminals going to attack it? So in a lot of our reports, you'll see attack scenarios regularly. So, in the cloud, again, they're going to attack you through credential theft. They're going to attack you through trying to look for misconfigurations. S3 buckets are huge in the news on being found, because think about an S3 bucket out of the gate, out of the default is that it's not available to the internet and it's not accessible. Well, somebody had to probably misconfigure that S3 bucket to be open to the internet, and that's what the criminals are looking for. They are scanning using Shodan to scan the entire internet to figure out where's an open IP. Once they find an IP, what's available on that IP? Is there open ports? Are there open applications? Are there vulnerabilities? Vulnerabilities are another area that they are looking for. You heard earlier about API usage. Well, everybody in the cloud and all the application vendors in the cloud are moving to APIs. Those APIs at times are not configured properly, and they are being exploited by the threat actors out there. So they're going to look at that as well. We're going to be talking about DevOps here in just a little bit, right? Well, these developers have keys to the castle, essentially, right? So, I was talking to one of our researchers the other day, and he said, I asked him, who would you target in an organization if you were a hacker? And he said immediately, developers. They have access to the best systems. They have access to the data. They're regularly updating things. And so that's another challenge from a security perspective. So a couple of things, again, misconfigurations, credentials, administrative credentials, and then APIs and the misconfigurations of those APIs we're seeing a lot of.
Thank you for that. And did I hear that correctly? You said 290 million per day misconfigurations? Yeah.
That's unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be pretty scary for any CISO out there. So what can federal agencies do about kind of addressing? I mean, you talked about probably 5 or 6 broad categories of security challenges and vulnerabilities, misconfigurations and credential theft, crypto mining, and so forth. So what are some tips that you might have for some of our federal audience members?
Yeah, again, it's very similar to what you're doing in the previous time. So when you had your own data center, you had to secure that data center, right? So think about, especially for credential theft, first and foremost, can you harden up the administrative accounts that you're utilizing? Utilize multi-factor authentication is a huge way to bypass. So, if they were able to get access to the passwords, which again, they're doing brute forcing, they're password spraying technologies that allow them to obtain those passwords, they probably would not be able to break the multi-factor authentication process, the dual second factor process of logging into that account. So look at implementing that capability if possible for your administrative accounts, especially. Vulnerabilities, we saw just recently Zero Logon came out and with domain controllers. And so looking at patch management is going to be critical in the cloud infrastructure. Virtual patching is a technology that is very good because that can actually virtually patch the vulnerabilities until you have the time to take to test the patch from the vendor and then implement that patch out there. So a virtual patch, a network IPS or a host-based IPS solution is very good today as well there. On the crypto mining piece, obviously anti-malware, Steve talked about machine learning, artificial intelligence. Those technologies are very good now and implementing those so that they can identify the new malware that's coming onto those systems. Monitoring your cloud applications, your cloud servers, because when a crypto miner gets on there today, they still try to steal all the resources. So you'll see some degradation on your resources of those servers. Or those virtual machines. So take a look at that and do that monitoring of those. Extortion attacks are going to continue. They may try to steal a administrative account and then extort you for getting that account back or the data back that they steal. So again, that multi-layered security solution that you look to build, again, it really goes back to, Steve, where when you're developing your cloud and implementing your cloud, you have to think about security from day one. You have to think about, how do I secure the entire process? How do I secure that entire infrastructure as I build it, right? So implementing a lot of those tools, implementing a lot of the security controls around it can help. If you're looking at public cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, whatever it might be, you can look for technologies that are available there that can build security into the mix, because cloud is a shared responsibility between the cloud vendors like Amazon or Microsoft or Google and yourselves, because Amazon and Microsoft and Google aren't going to do everything. You have to secure your data, you have to secure your administrative accounts, you have to secure the systems that are running in that infrastructure.
Thank you, John. That's very helpful. Jamie or Bob, would you guys have anything to add to that in terms of what you're seeing on the security front and any tips or advice you might have for some of our federal audience members?
This is Jamie. I would say, if Don just referenced security is job zero, and that's 100% true. I would say a large percentage of the technologies that Amazon develops every single year are security focused. We're starting to leverage things like machine learning and building, no-cost services that will look across a customer's accounts and alert them, saying, John referenced an open S3 bucket. By default, it's locked down. You have to open it up. But we'll look across your accounts and say, hey, did you know that this is going on? And give you proactive things that we see that are potential vulnerabilities. And I think that's something that you get from the cloud that you don't really get from the traditional IT. So there's a tremendous amount of investment there. The CSPs are heavily invested in making sure that they don't have massive security breaches. The majority of the apps on your phone are all running on, the back-end systems are all running on the cloud. And you can imagine from credit card numbers to PII data, if a CSP loses that trust because of a massive security vulnerability, it's billions of dollars, right? So that they invest very heavily in it, and they build services that end customers can actually take advantage of to really help them protect against these threats that are maturing every day.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Let's jump into audience Q&A. Bob, we've already discussed some of the work you're doing with SLA standards, and we're running a little bit short on time. So I'd like to jump ahead to audience Q&A if we can. We do have a couple questions. One is directed to John, if you could. Can you please speak to some of the security challenges around Office 365?
Yeah, Office 365 is being implemented everywhere, right? And it's a great technology for organizations to improve their messaging area. But again, what the criminals are looking to do there, again, steal Office 365 account credentials. That's a big one. So they're sending phishing emails into the individuals, and it's popping up a Office 365 login account and trying to get the person to log into their account, and then that information goes straight to the criminal, right? So that's a challenge for organizations, thinking about that and training their users that when that pop-up should happen and when it shouldn't, because in most cases that pop-up only comes in when they're first logging into the account. Again, implementing two-factor authentication to get into your Office 365 account is huge. Spam and phishing are massive. Business email compromise is still a problem for organizations. So, and Microsoft does a pretty good job of the native security controls, but we still see millions and millions of threats getting through that. So I would say, look for third-party tools and third-party security tools to improve and build upon what Microsoft does in the Office 365 area. We're utilizing artificial intelligence now to look at writing styles, for example. So if your executives are writing their emails, we'll actually build a model to show how they write their emails. And if a criminal steals the credentials of that executive and tries to write an email, they probably won't write it similarly. So we'll be able to flag that and go and say, hey, this is a suspicious email. It isn't written like the normal email that an executive did. And we'll be able to flag that through the technology. So it's pretty impressive. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, criminals are going to take advantage of Office 365 all day long.
Thank you very much, John. We've got to wrap up. If I could, we'll just kind of go around the bend with Jamie first, Bob second, and John third. Just leave us with maybe 30 seconds of final tips or advice, please.
Sure. So I think that the federal government is starting to accelerate in their use of cloud. But to my point earlier, I think take a good look at don't start with the easy things. If you really want to get buy-in and you're serious about doing transformation to enable your mission in the future, start with something where there's significant buy-in. That's really going to get the agency kind of rowing the boat in the same direction, and will accelerate your cloud adoption.
Hi. Yes, I wanted to mention that cloud standards have been able to help people determine what a cloud is, how to talk about it, have a common vocabulary, and of course, when you're dealing with your cloud provider, you should have a common vocabulary so you both know what you're talking about at the time. Getting those definitions squared away, using definitions from standards organizations. ISO has a standard on that. At the end of the day, before we leave, I will put in links to some ISO standards that people might want to use on the reference architecture, on the vocabulary, and the SLAs. And they're these are freely available, so you don't have to pay a fee to get those standards.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for having us today. I would just say, again, think about security from the beginning. Educate your employees who are managing and developing the cloud for your organization. And then think about how the criminals are going to target you. Talk to your security vendors. Make sure they have a secure cloud platform, not just specific products, but a platform that can look at the entire cloud infrastructure and how it can secure that. So good luck out there, and look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks so much, Jamie, Bob, John. Appreciate all your views and perspectives. This was a terrific discussion. Steve Winter, will transition back to you and have a short break. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Terrific panel, folks. Thanks so much for everybody's insights. That was great. And so on behalf of TSPi, let's thank the following companies for their support: Amazon Web Services, Red Hat, Trend Micro, Checkmarks, and of course, TSPi. Next up is our keynote speaker, the Chief Software Officer of the U.S. Air Force and the co-lead for DoD Enterprise DevSecOps Initiative with the DoD CIO, Nicholas Shalan. A highly qualified expert, Nicholas Shalan is appointed as the first Air Force Chief Software Officer. He is also the co-lead for the Department of Defense Enterprise DevSecOps Initiative with the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer. As the Air Force's senior software czar, Mr. Shalan is responsible for enabling Air Force programs in the transition to both Agile and DevSecOps to establish force-wide DevSecOps capabilities and best practices, including continuous authority to operate processes faster and better, streamlined to technology adoption. The Chief Software Officer works with the program executive officers and is responsible for analyzing current software and cloud migration plans to avoid vendor lock-ins while allowing for rapid prototyping and a streamlined process for deployment. To keep up with the pace of technology, Mr. Shalon evaluates and authorizes new commercially available off-the-shelf software and cloud-related technologies to help with their adoption across various Air Force programs based on their mission needs. His complete bio can be found in our resource library. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Shalon was called away literally at the last minute and was unable to join us live today. But as this subject is very near and dear to his heart, he was able to record his keynote presentation yesterday. And so now we present Nicholas Shalon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas Shalon, the Chief Software Officer for the Air Force. I'm also the co-leader of the DoD Enterprise DevSecOps Initiative, and we're so excited today to share with you some of the successes of the DoD when we move to Kubernetes and NIST. So let's get started. Obviously, timeliness is critical, and we must rapidly adapt to challenges and events, and it is obviously critical to do it as a team. And for us, it's quite a large team with a lot of different technologies and modules and pieces to put together that we need to bring with us, and even to space, if that wasn't easy enough, with quite a few sensors and modules that need to be swappable so we can have a modular architecture as well, all with their help, with quite a few people across multiple countries and physical locations to make it easier if it wasn't already easy. And to achieve that dream, we partnered across all of DoD to create a DoD Enterprise DevSecOps Initiative. And really the goal of the initiative is to bring talent together, to bring enterprise capabilities and remove impediments to move to DevSecOps across the department. The first piece was to create two enterprise teams, Cloud One and Platform One. Cloud One is the cloud provider office having access to Amazon and Azure and the classified clouds like the IC Cloud and Fences. And the Platform One is the DevSecOps managed service that brings DevSecOps as a service on any environment, including on-premise, on the cloud, on the weapon systems, on the space system, anywhere. And the key aspect was to ensure we would not get locked into a cloud provider or to a platform or to a product. And so we abstracted everything by using Kubernetes and containers as reusable Lego blocks. On top of that, we created the Iron Bank, which is the centralized artifact repo, container repo of DoD, where we centrally harden and accredit containers. Now we have about 200 containers on the Iron Bank, and that's accessible to everybody. That's very exciting for us to be able to open source back all this work. Everything we do is based on Zero Trust, so we use Zero Trust and behavior detection on our stack. We'll talk about that today. And we use a service mesh called Istio and Knative for a function as a service, serverless, and Kubeflow for AI machine learning, deep learning. We need to train a few people, 100,000 people this year, so we are building a self-learning training hub that will be able to bring state-of-the-art and biased content on DevSecOps and software and cloud and innovation. And we partner with the Linux Foundation, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and O'Reilly the books to do that. So everything we do is open source, so we want to share back, and we, part of that DevSecOps initiative, we have this website, softwaredev.mil, and the page DSOP documents will give you all of the architecture documents, all of the information you need to know what's going on with the initiative and have access to the source code, have access to what we do, and so feel free to check it out. We also have all the training content as well, and all the services and source code and information of Platform One and Cloud One on that page as well. So why did we pick Kubernetes and containers? Well, the first aspect we talked about abstraction and avoiding vendor lock-in. Of course, containers are immutable and can be centrally accredited and assessed, but also Kubernetes provides resiliency thanks to the self-healing of containers when they crash, can inject automatically our cyber stack, so we know it's going to be running. We know it's going to be automatically present as a sidecar container, and we created the concept of a sidecar container security stack that's injected inside our entire environment, so we have the same cyber capabilities across the entire stack. It is also adaptable thanks to the Lego blocks that can be swapped with no downtime, and of course, auto scale based on the compute and memory needs as well. Automation is critical, so we use infrastructure as code and GitOps to automate the deployment of the DevSecOps stack on any environment on demand. That brings a lot of flexibility as well. When you think of a DevSecOps stack and the complexity of all these pieces and tools, that's just an example that you see on the screen, but we really have 200 plus tools. And so you can imagine if you have to run dev, testing, staging, production environments at multiple classification levels, you end up having hundreds of these environments, and you don't want to have drift between classification levels, between environments, running as virtual machines. So everything we do is containerized and running on containers that can be centrally assessed and accredited. That brings a ton of value for our teams to not have to reinvent the wheel and inherit the hardening that we do on these Lego blocks. When you think of layers, we have an infrastructure layer that could be a cloud, that could be a classified cloud, on-premise, weapon systems, edge use case, whatever the case may be. On top of that, we're going to put platform one, which is first the Kubernetes platform, our CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous delivery with completely containerized, and then the service mesh as well, which brings the east and west traffic management and zero trust enforcement. What's left of the application layer is very small, 95% inheritance of the NIST cybersecurity controls. So a lot of flexibility and not having to reinvent the wheel when it comes to cyber controls as well. Platform one is a centralized team that creates that central piece where we can centrally accredit the software, the platform, and provide as a service to all these teams. You see software teams, software factory teams, program offices, scientific technology research groups, and of course, other agencies and different initial-based vendor startups, companies, primes that can piggyback on the platform and work as well. To make Platform One successful and to really scale that enterprise vision, we wanted to think of it as a company bringing services to its customer with different flexibility. Some are free services, some are pay-per-use. The first two we built were Wrapup 1 and Iron Bank. Wrapup 1 is a source code repo of all the containers and the infrastructure as code. We use Terraform, so we're not locked into the cloud provider. And we have all the automation for all the Kubernetes distributions that we support there. And then we have the Iron Bank, which is the binary side of the containers. That's the 200 plus containers we have centrally approved and assessed. And those are signed and ready to go as binaries so they can be consumed by the teams. And that's accessible to everybody. It's open source. The two main services we built, on top of that, we have the Party Bus and the Big Bang, and you can see we have pretty cool names. The Party Bus is the multi-tenant dev test staging production environment where we have the DevSecOps tools. We have that at multiple classification levels, and we have this provided as a turnkey capability, so teams don't have to set it up and worry about accreditation and things like that. It is simply a developer access. So they don't get to pick the tools. We have multiple options so that they don't get to pick all the tools we have there. That's the limitation of the Party Bus versus the Big Bang, which is a dedicated instance of Platform One for larger teams or larger programs that want to have a completely dedicated environment at different classification levels. So we do that as well, where they can get dedicated enclaves specific to their needs at different classification levels as well. So that gives the best of both worlds. You can have a team using the multi-tenant stack, which is a pay-per-use model per developer, or a big bang instance where they have to buy the licenses, and we help them with that. We have contract vehicles to help them. And the next piece of that is the hardened containers. So if a team needs dedicated containers, we can provide that as well as a managed service. And so they can come to us, and we will centrally accredit software as well. So that brings also a lot of value as well. Training and continuous learning is critical, and of course, we need to make sure that training is accessible virtually at scale. So we created a learning hub that lets teams be onboarded and have access to a self-learning capability. There's 1 day, 3 days session workshops too, but then the more important option we have is the 2 months onboarding, where we can onboard teams and embed Platform One people into their teams, define what the minimal viable product will be in 2 months, and deliver that in production automatically. So that brings a ton of value as well. GitOps is foundational to our success. And really, when we think and take a step back and look at the complexity of what we do, you want to be in a situation where everything is provided as a turnkey single source of truth, where Git becomes a central component of everything. And really, the beauty there is that your source code becomes your source of truth, of your desired state, and everything is code. Infrastructure, networking, configuration changes, everything is code. That becomes your auditable compliance stack. That also brings a lot of value when it comes to consistent deployment, automation, a rollback if you have issues, and disaster recovery as well, because you end up in a situation where you just have to back up your Git repo and your data, and you have a full disaster recovery copy of your stack. We call it treating it as cattle instead of pets, where your entire stack becomes something you can technically decide to turn off and bring back up and running as needed as a push-button deployment capability. And so that is really bringing a lot of flexibility for the teams, because they can easily deploy the stack and know that the end state will be completely automated and replicable, and there will be no drift between deployments. We use Argo CD, which is also open source, but part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation as well, like Kubernetes. And Argo lets you pull from Git. So the difference here is that your CI/CD tools will not have access to your production and staging environment. It will be pulling from Git. So you don't have the CI/CD tools having to get access to the staging and production keys to connect to those environments. Instead, it's the production or staging environment that pull from Git. So that reduce your attack surface, that reduce the risk and the cyber threats, and creates that declarative manifest aspect where everything is code and showing your desired state in Git. Like we talked about, that really brings that automation value, and that really helps with the streamlining of the DevSecOps instantiation on different stacks. That foundation also of our Zero Trust stack with the service mesh. So for people that don't know what a service mesh is, the service mesh manages the east and west traffic between containers, but it also streamlines a lot of the capabilities when you're moving to microservices and you're moving to containers from a monolithic application standpoint, and you're going to have teams with different programming languages. You want to make sure that you don't tightly couple microservices, but also their releases. And you want to be able to release microservice at their own pace without having to wait for other services to be released or updated. And so often back in the day, you would have to share libraries and dependencies for authentication, encryption, and different things.
Now the service mesh will be taking care of that. And the service mesh will be running as a sidecar container. And for people that don't know what a sidecar container is, the sidecar is a small container that runs alongside all the big containers, and they're automatically injected by Kubernetes, so you have that running regardless. And that is really bringing a ton of, because now that sidecar can be updated without having to update the main container. And so it's not inside the container, so it's alongside the container, which also brings a ton of cyber value as well. So that's something to keep in mind for teams that are moving to microservices. You cannot succeed today in 2020 without a service mesh. Service mesh will bring a ton of value. It will enable teams to do authentication, encryption, service mesh like Istio that we use, which is open source, inject the mutual TLS tunnel across the entire stack so they can communicate using encryption, and a strong identity using certificate, using X509 certificates. So there's so much value. Also brings service discovery and smart dynamic routing. So really a service mesh is a must. I don't think a team will be able to succeed without that kind of capability as well. So really think of the service mesh as a big enabler back to the layers we talked about, and I'm going to go to the next slide, where we have the service mesh layer that is abstracting the application and bringing a lot of value to make sure that the application can inherit authentication capabilities and encryption and zero trust without having to build these capabilities within that microservice itself. And that really streamlines kind of the process there. So like we talked about, for larger organizations moving to DevSecOps, if you need to succeed in deploying DevSecOps at an enterprise scale, you want to make sure you bring something like Platform One to the table, where Platform One will be able to provide these capabilities as a service to your teams. But what's critical as well is that you do not want to have a one-size-fits-all offering. You want to bring options. You want to make sure that those options are not maybe too vast, to make sure you're not wasting funding, but at the same time, never just one option. And really something to keep in mind. I don't think enterprise services are successful when you have a limited set of options, but at the same time, sometimes you don't have a choice. So you really have to weigh the benefits of that. There are a few things where, centralizing or mandating pieces make sense, particularly when it comes to cybersecurity. We created the concept of a continuous authority to operate, a continuous ATO that continuously accredits software by accrediting the factory and the software coming out of the factory, passing those gates. So typical gates for a software factory will be change management gates. So how many set of eyes on code do you have to approve a code change? And then you would have two other gates, the testing gates and the cyber gates. The testing gates will be how much tests do you do on your software for unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing. And then the cyber side would have things like static dynamic analysis, container security scanning, and bill of material scanning. So dependencies of dependencies, what you use in terms of dependencies and open source stacks. So again, there is no higher risk of using open source versus commercial software, but you need to treat everything as risk because you don't know what dependencies it's pulling. So you need to always centrally assess and accredit these dependencies and Lego blocks like we do with Iron Bank. So teams don't have to do that per team because they're not going to have the time and they're going to take shortcuts. They're going to get behind in releases. For us with Iron Bank, if we centrally update containers, they get replicated across all the environments immediately. So we can push software update in a matter of minutes. So hopefully this gave you a good understanding of what we do in the DoD when it comes to DevSecOps. If you have questions, of course, you can always reach out to us at usaf.cso@mail.mil. But I also, again, want to remind people that you should really check out our website where we have all the content we talked about. And that's the software.net.me website /DSOP/documents and the source code repo with Repo 1. It's a two-way street. You can push your code, your containers. If you're a company with a capability you want to get accredited and pushed across DoD in the marketplace, do push it to Iron Bank so your containers will be accredited, centrally approved, and you can join the contract vehicles so people can buy your licenses as well. Wanted to thanks everyone for their time, and looking forward for working with you guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, folks, let's have a great big virtual thank you for Mr. Chaland for that presentation.
Maybe we'll see.
Because we've been this way from the start. Because the solution for one can be harnessed by others. Because clouds that compete can still connect. Because innovation needs collaboration. Because a revolutionary approach to software can transcend enterprise IT. Red Hat. Our code is open.
Okay, folks, our next session is going to take an in-depth look at application modernization. But first, let's once again thank our sponsors for today's event. Special thanks to Amazon Web Services, Red Hat, Trend Micro, Checkmarks, and our host, TSPi. And now, onto the application modernization panel and our moderator. Over the course of his 2-decade career, this gentleman has built a reputation as a solutions-oriented leader focused on building strong client relationships and delivering impactful results. He's currently a vice president with TSPi, and in that role, he provides executive oversight and direction for the company's public sector, agriculture, financial, and healthcare business solutions. Please welcome Brad Wintermute. Brad, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Wintermute. In this session, we're going to be talking about application modernization and IT transformation. Joining me today are Brian Merrick with the Department of State and Roy Vargas with the NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service. So before we get to discussing app modernization, I'd like each of them to introduce themselves and provide a little bit of the background on experiences and their current role in each of their respective agencies. Brian, would you like to start first?
Sure. So I've had a series of roles, from the business side and the IT side. I'm working with cloud for several years, especially with some of our digital outreach activities at the department. And so now I'm the director for our cloud program office. And really what we're doing is trying to modernize the department's approach and federate it across the different pieces of the agency, while still making sure that we're allowing for the highly tailorable requirements that need to be met across the globe for different business functions. So we're providing consistent shared cloud services and platforms, and also enterprise application products to support major initiatives within the department.
Great. Thanks. Roy, how about telling us a little bit about you and the National Marine Fisheries Service?
Good morning, Brad, and nice to see you all, even if it's virtually. And it looks like Brian has the right idea, sitting outside and enjoying this. And hopefully some of the rest of you are also. I have a good view of the outside. Yeah, like Brad said, I'm Roy Varghese. I'm with the National Marine Fisheries Service. For those of you who don't know us, we are part of Department of Commerce in the Bureau NOAA. And our job is stewardship of the environment in terms of the ocean resources and the habitat. So natural resources, when you think fish, you think of us. We're the ones who ensure that the seafood you eat are sustainable, the wonderful species that you enjoy, like whether it be the dolphins or the turtles or the whales that you go whale watching and seeing are around for generations to come. So we're in the conservation and stewardship side. And I've been with the agency about 10 years. And looking at the calendar here, in another week, I will celebrate my 10-year anniversary as a Fed at NOAA Fisheries. And my 10-year career at NOAA started with an expectation that it'll be a 6-month job. And at that time, it was also modernization. We were going to go from a very small single application cluster into a little bit modern architecture 10 years ago, and unified data center architecture for an Oracle-based application for fishers to get permits. That was 10 years ago. And I thought it was a 6-month gig to stand up the data center, and then I'm out. 10 years later, I'm responsible for the IT operations and the CIO function for the agency. About 4,000 people, 50 locations, now 4,000 locations, right? In our portfolio, there are hundreds of applications scattered all over the country. Application development's very distributed. And we are in the cloud journey also, migrated a number of applications that are high visibility, high availability requirements. And then some of the mission critical, sensitive and privacy concerned applications are still on-prem, and we're in the process of migrating those over too. So I can't wait to hear from you, Brian, in terms of how what you guys are doing at the state and State Department, and learning from you also.
Yes, absolutely. So both of you guys have great experience with federal space. So let's discuss application modernization a little bit. I'd like both of you to kind of take a moment to describe for the audience what application modernization, IT transformation efforts are currently underway at the agency, and then maybe some of the roadblocks, et cetera, that you faced. And so I think we'll start with Brian. Just talk about what you're currently doing, and give the audience some kind of insight there on maybe things that they could avoid.
Sure. Yeah. So just a little context. We have about 275 posts overseas, and we're in most countries. And in addition, we have 50 nations scattered across the U.S. A highly federated organization, about 110,000 core business users in our community, in addition to a multitude of other folks that we share data with, including the general public. So as you can imagine, it's a fairly complex environment. We've definitely taken more of a federation approach. Complete centralization really just doesn't work. So on the app side, what we're really shooting for is to consolidate the platforms that our business customers are using versus trying to consolidate the application layer. Because frankly, we have so many different constituencies that need to interact with those applications that we'd be in a constant change management cycle, right? And so instead, what we're looking at is saying, look, why don't we consolidate onto a minimal number of diverse platforms? I mean, we do manage a multi-cloud environment, many different public cloud vendors, but then make sure that we're helping our business customers use the right tool for the right job. So, we're providing a span of IaaS and SaaS capability. And then, in terms of what's been happening lately, we really focused on a couple of main things, improving the way we manage IT. So we moved all of our ticket system, our configuration management database into the cloud. That's gone live. It's really proving helpful. So we can start really knitting things together. And this year, we're going to do a lot more connecting the business dots, if you will. And then on the application level, we leveraged SaaS very heavily, especially during COVID, so that we could provide enterprise application capabilities for things that a lot of the business owners didn't necessarily own directly. And so that helped us in terms of business support. So our team rolled out 10 applications in 2-3 weeks across the world, to do things like track repatriation flights of Americans coming back because of COVID, the status of medical personnel at our posts, figuring out decision support for senior management on, whether they should close something or open something. Definitely some very impactful things, and also tracking what's going on around the rest of the world, of course, as you can imagine. And with that, it really brought a resurgence, a better understanding of data as an asset, how to leverage that data, and better use it for analytics purposes. So we're really seeing a big growth now in terms of, one, the need to actually modernize applications, not just lift and shift, but redesign them. And then two, looking at data as an asset that can be leveraged by senior management, and what are the things we need to do to better leverage that. In terms of challenges, wow, change management, always a challenge. This is paradigmatic change. We got a lot of opportunity from just the exigency of the COVID experience, but still difficult to do change management remotely and virtually with everyone involved. Especially we still have a lot of folks across the agency thinking waterfall. And, when they're getting their training, they expect everything fully complete, and it's an iterative process, as you know. So working through that. And then I'd say that one of the other big challenges, certainly policy. We need a lot of hybrid solutions now. And so enabling that, where we're accessing on-prem data leveraged by SaaS-facing tools, definitely challenging from a policy standpoint for networking and security folks. So we're working through those issues and definitely meeting with a lot of success. I think where we're going to see a lot of movement now is reimagining the business purposes that they can use IT for across the business owner community. And then certainly looking at new ways to move data in new directions. We're starting to dip our toe into AI and machine learning and bots for some of our simpler processes. I think that's going to really take off. We've also started a lot of analytics capabilities. I think that's going to grow exponentially. So nobody anymore is asking, should I use the cloud? It's how fast can I get this piece to do what I need to do? So I think it's definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's good. What about mobile? Have you seen an increase the need for mobile because of COVID, maybe, or more remote access? I mean, everyone, I assume, is connected to using a laptop, but what about a need for mobile applications?
Absolutely critical to have mobility enabled, that's for sure. We're seeing, we moved 85% of our workforce to complete 100% telework in 2 weeks. And, we're an organization culturally that, diplomacy is a face-to-face event. And so it was a big culture change, definitely brought out a need for mobility. We used a lot of proxy servers to be able to access some of our legacy applications through browsers. Not optimal, but it's getting it done for now. So a lot of the app owners are looking to actually make sure that the platforms they're leveraging on the mobile side can render with responsive design. So that our mobile users can do that. And a lot of things we've built at the enterprise level. We had folks checking repatriation flights through a mobile app on their personal iPhone through browser-based access from an airport. So we're definitely seeing that adoption is driving quickly. And it's definitely panning out in our agency.
Makes sense. All right, let's shift to Roy then. Roy, you want to talk to us about your current IT transformation and app modernization efforts? Any pitfalls that we should avoid, or maybe successes that you've seen that to do it this way and you'll be successful, kind of thing?
Maybe I'll start by talking in the context of what modernization and transformation means, right? We hear those terms thrown out a lot, and at the end of the day, I am sitting in my chair doing my job at no fisheries to enable and empower the mission. So I need to have the conversation with my mission partners to figure out what do they need? How do I enable them? How do I empower them to get their job done faster? And Brian is 100% right. The one of the silver linings of COVID is that we as IT practitioners and evangelists don't need to make the case that hey, moving to the cloud is the right thing to do. We don't need to make that case at all, right? If anything, we have a capacity problem, capacity execute based on the demands that are coming from the field. But it's important to have the conversation about what modernization means, what digital transformation means, what does digitization mean, what does going digital mean to the business? And it's very different depending on who you speak to. And our organization, as I mentioned, not as dispersed as Brian. It's not 275 countries, but it might as well be 4,000 different countries, because when you're talking about scientists, they're individuals with their unique perspective on how to collect data, how to process data, how to do the science and develop solutions that meet the need. And Brad, you know that full well, coming from with your FDA background. So having the conversation with them, we have over 800 or so applications that are in the science and mission support side, that essentially are collecting data, processing it, developing information and actionable insights, and then presenting it to whoever the decision maker is, or to the public at large, right? From a technology perspective, we know how to modernize it very easily. We can come to a solution very quickly, right? That's unfortunately the biggest risk, in my view, that we as technologists see the final solution before our mission sees it or is ready to embrace it. So having the dialogue is very important. So in some cases, let me speak a little bit more practically. Some cases, we may need to take incremental steps in terms of getting them to leverage AI and machine learning. I'll give you an example. In our world, we have to do assessment on the health of a fishery stock, so we can tell the public and the industry how much tuna they should catch, right? Bluefin tuna, or how much pollock they should be catching, so that the fish fillet sandwich you eat, prices don't go up, and you can still have the sandwich or the sushi at a price that's reasonable. And that requires a lot of data points. And we can envision a world using technologies from partners to streamline that much quickly than it is presently done. But the way we do science and management is a collaborative approach. We need to build consensus, especially when you're talking about AI. You need to build trust in the AI to the stakeholders for them to embrace, right? Otherwise, they will be questioning the algorithm, questioning the science, and we have to be very careful. So from an app modernization perspective, we've taken the approach of it's very much an a la carte solution. So in some cases, we're refactoring the application on a low-code, no-code platform. For example, our consultation process, when we consult with other agencies, including in some cases the State Department and EPA and Food and Drug Administration and Coast Guard and others in terms of environmental impact, that consultation information needs to be shared with the public at large as well as internally. We can build that kind of a business system, business process management system with low-code platform, and we've been able to do that, successfully deploy it iteratively and be able to see value and people embrace it, as opposed to the traditional waterfall approach. So that's been very successful. We are also in the business of sharing our work products with the public at large, and for that, we may need to take a different technology solution approach. So refactoring versus just in some cases lift and shift the existing code into a new structure is also that's an option. So we're looking at everything from going cloud native to migrating to an application into a cloud platform by just pure lift and shift from a VM environment on-prem to a cloud environment to increase availability and get economies of scale in terms of cost. And Brian, you're right. We're also rapidly adopting SaaS products. and that's been one of the big successes. And I would say roadblocks and lessons learned. One aspect is, our people need to be trained on how to leverage these technologies effectively. Without that, you will not really get the return on investment that you need. So we have embraced this mantra of we need to retain, reskill, and recruit the next generation of workforce. That means we need to invest heavily in training, understanding the competencies and providing training opportunities, and also attract people who care about working in this innovative and new platforms into our organization, because our mission is pretty cool, pretty fantastic, and people when they hear about what we do want to work with us. And the other aspect is we still, to some extent, we're government. Our processes are harder to change. Everything from our change management process to how we get to ATO, right? We need to rethink how our processes need to adapt to the modern era and take some approaches. So we've worked hard on those two aspects so that we can get some successes early, get some early wins, and get buy into the process and go from there.
Yeah, organizational change is always, getting people to buy into that is always a challenge. And then certainly the skills are trying to keep up with the rapid change in technology is always, when I was at the FDA, that was a big challenge because people knew technology that we were using, but that was technology generally that was 10 years ago in vogue technology, and so it was always a challenge. So Brian, do you have similar challenges with training and, workforce over at the State Department?
Oh, of course. I mean, I think everybody is facing that, not just in industry, or I'm sorry, not just in government, but industry as well. And I totally echo all those comments. I mean, it's a real challenge, and we've been working on it. And some of the things we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we change the perception of the possibilities of modern technology, and then how the organization manages it and shares information. So, for instance, I'm co-chairing a new working group across the agency. We're going to have our first app development summit around the world in 2 weeks. And what we're really trying to do is bring together the application development community across the agency, at a grassroots level, at the teams level, and bring in, vendors from industry about best practice, have the team share their best practices, and then give them a feedback loop to come back to the enterprise and say, hey, these are the core enablers I need so I can do better development, whether it be SaaS or custom development. We want to make sure that people are sharing that information, because historically, everyone stayed in their sort of organizational silo, and so it was really hard to capitalize on abilities to train folks on possibilities and capabilities, and also for folks to share information across different organizational boundaries. So we're thinking that's definitely going to help move in the right direction. We're also trying to focus in our change efforts on really integrating actual users, that at scale into our testing process and our agile processes, and making sure that we are adjusting our training material to those user bases. Whether it be short videos, actually using people from the business units to conduct the training, like a train the trainer approach for better buy-in. And certainly one of the key things, can't stress enough, is the engagement with the business side. I think if on the IT side, we're focused on things that are real mission priorities to the business, it's going to be a lot easier to get that senior management support to drive adoption and to enable training events to really be more well attended. So things like that, I think, are going to be helpful in moving forward, but it's a real challenge. And then briefly on the retention piece, just like Roy was saying, I mean, if you have cool work, you're going to get more energetic workers with better expertise doing the work. And so what we're trying to do is make sure we get the word out there, whether it be our contract labor partners or as we're trying to hire staff, to make sure they understand the kinds of things we're working on and the opportunities they'll have to increase their skill sets and to do meaningful work that's related to our mission, which is pretty exciting. And we're at the spearhead of diplomacy for the country. we're all over the world interacting with all kinds of different organizations and cultures. So it can be really exciting stuff, doing impactful things. And I think that's something that agencies sometimes kind of lose sight of, but it's a huge marketing point, especially for younger folks that want to make a difference. So it's something we shouldn't, we shouldn't underestimate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes the folks that are younger coming out of college and looking for a career, they're thinking, well, government's going to be stodgy, and I want to be able to work in the latest technology. And so being able to offer the latest technology and cool work environments should be a plus for sure. So that's good. Let's move our focus a little bit. We've talked a little kind of already about future, but kind of look towards the future, and what are the top priorities for the next 2 to 5 years or so in each of your agencies, on where do you think you're really going, and where are you going to get the most bang for your buck if you are looking at your crystal ball today, and what do you think there? I guess we'll start with Roy on this one. Any thoughts?
Thanks, Brad. Fortunately, I don't need to look at a crystal ball because we've been working the last few years in terms of laying out a plan for what the next few years is going to look like. From a NOAA perspective, we have laid out a research priorities that to leverage some of the technologies like AI, ML, uncrewed platform, like if you're thinking about drones. So for us, it's marine as well as air platforms to collect data, focusing on data as a strategic asset and leveraging the organization, ensuring that we are taking advantage of the cloud. I'm on the fishery side. We really care about omics, the whole idea that biosciences can play a role in understanding our environment so that we can manage it better. And last but not least is this idea that as an agency, I think we can do a better job with the taxpayers' dollars as well as for humanity if we open the door and embrace citizen science. The best ideas don't come from just the 4,000 people that are part of NOAA Fisheries or the 19,000 people part of NOAA. We, as an organization, is better if we invite others to be part of solving the bigger problems, bigger challenges. So I spoke in terms of NOAA Fisheries specifically. The challenge is, how do we manage our resources and understand our ecosystems so that we can manage the resources better, whether it be protecting them or from a recreational commercial fishery, harvesting them, right? So we've laid out a plan. Now we're in the middle of, and I'm leading the NOAA effort on cloud adoption, and the cloud strategy, and the implementation plan for cloud is going to be published hopefully in the next couple of months, and Nancy Majauer is leading that effort from our office to lay out that plan. Specifically for NOAA Fisheries, we see a world where we will standardize on a single platform for our cloud migration. For applications that need to be built to leverage AI, ML. And in our case, we've awarded a multi-year contract with Google to do that work. So cloud native work for mission applications probably will end up in that platform, unless it makes sense to go to a low-code platform or a software as a service. So, or build custom. So what does that mean? So we need a robust application rationalization process. We need some structure around why we need to do what we need to do. So the conversation about digital transformation and app modernization, we've had many conversations where our business partners come to us and say, hey, I want to move this particular application to XYZ technology, right? Because they may have done research in some cases. Some cases they may have heard about one solution from one of these sessions, and they're like, I want that. We have invested heavily in building a relationship with and partnership with that business unit to say, okay, we hear you, let's understand, and let's make sure that that is the right decision, and let's do the appropriate level of market research and engagement with all stakeholders so that the right solution gets built. So sometimes that path is slow, sometimes the path is much faster. That's the other part too, right? Because they might be thinking custom developed when some solutions might be out of the box available on a platform that we already have. Or leverage an existing solution that's in play at another agency when you're talking about SaaS or PaaS solutions, right? Or a lot of the cloud vendors have 70, 80, 100, hundreds of products ready to be leveraged. So we, as an IT community, owe it to our mission to educate them, to be able to do that kind of conversations. And we've done that with electronic monitoring in terms of image analytics to ensure that we have a better handle of what kind of fisheries stock is being harvested. We're doing that in terms of permitting and engagement with our stakeholders, whether it be a rec fish or commercial fishery, getting permits to go catch fish. So it's that kind of dialogue, I believe, is very it's essential for the partnership that needs to exist between the mission and technology. And I think becoming a partner is the best thing we can do as IT community. And we will be whether you sit on the vendor side or on the Fed side. I think when we go in it together, we can deliver the best solution and really have a long-term partnership. And I think that's what everybody is in it for. Long-term partnership that solves the mission problem that has tangible results in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it's always a challenge, when you've got business, I used to have business partners, if within the agency that would play armchair quarterback, right? So they slept in a Holiday Inn last night. Today they're an IT expert and they have the solution and they bring it in. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know if that's going to be the right thing. Let's sit down and talk. And I think that is the right way to get things to go forward. Brian, how about you? What are your what are you looking at from a priorities kind of in this future view of where are you going with the Department of State?
Yeah, I think we're going to leverage a lot more low code and no code for the majority of our app requirements. We're really trying to factor in our culture organizationally, right? And so, as I said, with the federation of the business, we want to put easy, efficient tools in the hands of our business customers to be able to do small applications they need for, say, a tasker system or a simple workflow without having to spend a major investment or do the change management to get everyone in exactly the same approach. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. We're also going to do with a lot more citizen development, if you will, at our local business levels. And then I think a lot of the larger organizations we support will definitely be moving into the cloud even faster. And we're going to see a lot more adoption of centrally provided infrastructure and platforms. And that infrastructure is changing. I mean, we've been very network centric for a long time, just by virtue of our necessity. And now with the advent of the cloud and the commoditization of some of these tools, it's really lending itself to centralizing the back end to reduce cost and complexity and improve security. But then, like I said, we're definitely going to see a lot more dispersion of more applications, which I think is great. And also applications that are more useful for our user base. One of the things we're definitely seeing along the lines of mobility and obviously the COVID experience, the population of our workforce is changing, and it's expecting to have the same experience at work that you can on your iPhone at home. And that's really driving the business community, if you will, to say, hey, look, what was good enough before, it's just not going to cut it. We need responsive tools. We need things that are simple, fast, easy, that I don't have a lot of complexity around in terms of how to use them. So we want to see less training on the user side because the facing is just intuitive, and it should be. We also want to reduce data, duplicate data entry through more data sharing. I think we're going to see more of that, better data standardization. and definitely a lot more dashboarding and decision support for our leadership so they can take that data and turn it into informations that culminate in decisions. And so I think a lot of that is going to continue to evolve. On the technical side, I think we're going to see movement. We've already started looking at things into peering solutions so we can reduce our boundary risks. Changing, like I said, the way we get to these applications and resources securely. We're going to see a lot more mobile platforms. I wouldn't necessarily say mobile apps because most modern apps, if you build them correctly, can render mobile. But definitely having that in mind through the design process and really seeing a lot more deliberate execution of that. We're also probably going to see a lot more containerization, a lot more microservices, and definitely a strong move into the SaaS piece. I mean, the buy once, build many is really powerful from a SaaS standpoint. The argument around I asked initially was, oh, it'll save money, but especially from a government standpoint, we get big tranches of money maybe a couple times a year or so. Metered consumption costing, really difficult to get that planning spot on. So just the way the government operates, it's hard to take advantage of that at scale without creating a lot of risk. So I think, not that we won't have it, obviously we have quite a bit of it, but I think we'll continue to see the move into SaaS. And like I said, I think we'll have a lot more trust and better processes around the use of bots and machine learning. But I think at the same time, that's going to lend us or end us up in some really interesting policy areas. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff we're doing now to kind of start is really in the back office management side, if you will. So there's no real impact from a larger policy standpoint. But there are certainly a lot of applications for blockchain, public and private, for machine learning, use of drones and other things in our environment, Internet of Things, that are going to land us into some really interesting policy areas that we're going to have to resolve. And so I think we're going to have to create a better framework to address those as they come up, getting the right SMEs involved with the right business owners to be able to balance the risk to the agency and to the country on some of these issues that are going to arise from the use of technology. But it's going to be an exciting time, definitely, for the next 5 years. Guarantee that.
Absolutely, and I guess a lot of the policy goes around, citizens' engagement and citizen experience. So, is there anything you can comment on in the last few minutes we've got around, IT transformation and how that affects the citizen engagement, citizen experience?
Yeah. So as you can imagine, I mean, we do visas and passports in our agency, and lots of citizen engagement for a multitude of reasons around the world, both U.S. and foreign citizenry. And so, yeah, a huge push in the programmatic side to leverage technology to improve the experience. And so really what we're looking to do across the board, the big we, if you will, is simplifying that user experience for inputting data and making sure that the data that comes in is forced to be complete and is connected to master reference data sources as well for those things that need to be consistent, and that we're sharing data between those different business purposes as appropriate. So for the person in the public, they don't have to re-enter their same information multiple times, and then we have point in time and cutoff issues and whatnot between different systems. And so I think that's going to improve the user experience and also things like bringing in Wi-Fi into some of our overseas locations for the public that's interacting with us so they can pull up the information they need right there. We've already kind of started that. Some places obviously different than others from the security standpoint, but I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So our engagement with the public is definitely a major focus of improvement and streamlining and good human-centered design and usability. So we'll see a lot more of that as it goes on.
Yeah, I would imagine, if I showed up at, an embassy somewhere, I would expect to get on Wi-Fi. I can do that at Starbucks, right? So that's interesting for sure. Roy, how about you comment on, how is the IT transformation kind of affecting and hopefully improving citizen experience for NOAA?
I think that's an essential part of what we do. We are here to serve the public, and we collect a lot of information and share it and make decisions. And it is our responsibility to be able to disseminate that information in a way that is easily digestible. So our approach has been all about measuring, setting target. So if you're talking about public website and citizen engagement, figure out a way to independently measure it, whether it be an ACSI kind of a scoring metrics or some other ways. Have a target, right? And then you can hit it, whether it be if you pick Net Promoter Score or something like that in terms of citizen experience or even internal employee engagement experience. It's important that you have some sort of metrics to track how well we're doing. Otherwise, we'll be building systems that we love, but our users will have different ideas.
That's always a challenge, right? Just because you like it doesn't mean that the others will like it. And just in the last, we've got about 3 minutes left, but when we were going through here, what about open source? I think it was Brian it was Roy talking about getting scientific support from crowdsourcing. What about using open source technology in application development efforts? Are you moving more towards that, less towards that?
Absolutely. We are, I caught a tail end of the Git presentation when I came in, and we are a believer in the DevSecOps tool chain and incorporating tools that are both commercial and open source to build a tool chain that's robust enough that can operate on a cloud platform and shared by the community, as Brian talking about. And I think we have a policy in terms of how code can come into our environment and how we can share that code, because we believe that the code developed at NOAA should be shared, and of course within parameters, right? Within certain parameters. So we have policies in place to promote some of that, and it's our job as technology practitioners to make that easier. And we still have the same roadblocks as we mentioned earlier to make that a reality.
Gotcha. Brian, any comments on open source in our last minute?
Yeah, I'd say for us, it really depends on the business purpose. I mean, we have, different security parameters, right? So our folks that do public outreach, certainly they use a lot of open source code, but then we also have a lot of activities that impact national security. And because of that, we really, our risk tolerance doesn't really take us there. So I think we're like everything else. I mean, we're going to have a multifaceted approach based on the business need and the risk tolerance of the mission activity. So I guess the answer is yes. It's both. It depends.
It all depends, right? That sounds great. Listen, both of you, thank you very much. This has been a great session. This concludes our app modernization session. I really appreciate you taking the time today. I think the audience got a lot of good insights, and thank you, and have a great day. Enjoy the outside, Brian. It looks like a beautiful day.
Great.
See you both.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, guys, thanks so much to our app modernization panel. Brad, that was terrific, very insightful, and I think the audience really appreciated that. Next up is our DevSecOps panel.
Because we've been this way from the start. Because the solution for one can be harnessed by others. Because clouds that compete can still connect. Because innovation needs collaboration. Because a revolutionary approach to software can transcend enterprise IT. Red Hat. Our code is open.
we are ready for our final session of the morning. But before we get started, let's first recognize the sponsors to whom we are so grateful for their support. Thank you to Amazon Web Services, Red Hat, Trend Micro, Checkmarks, and of course our host, TSPi. And now, let's bring in our moderator for the DevSecOps panel, a respected thought leader in the federal IT community. This gentleman is founder and president of Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. He's two-time winner of the Federal 100 Award, a prestigious honor that recognizes government and industry leaders who play pivotal roles in federal IT and make a true difference in the way technology transforms the government. He is the co-author of more than 25 white papers, jointly published by both MITRE and ATARC, following collaborative sessions during the ATARC Federal IT Summit Series. Topics of these educational symposiums include mobile technology, cloud and data center, cloud data and analytics, DevOps, cybersecurity, health IT, network transformation, and IoT. Please welcome our moderator for this panel, Tom Suter. Tom, all yours.
Thank you, Steve. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, thank you for all those accolades. I keep forgetting we did a lot of these things. It's weird to hear somebody talk about you that way. Thank you very much, and it looks like you've had a fantastic day. I saw Nick Shalon. The last panel was fantastic, and we're going to have to really live up to the hype with all that good stuff going on. But we don't have too much time here, so without further ado, I would love to introduce our panel today, and we'll start off with Mia Jordan. How are you doing today, Mia? Can you hear me? Mia, we're having a little audio, I think. While we're working through that, I will go to my next panelist, John Osborne. John, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
I can. So you're working from home, socially distant?
Yeah, we bought an old stone house that we haven't moved into yet, so I've been commandeered this as my office, but it's been working out as a escape so far. So, yeah.
No, it looks like a nice work environment there. I like it. Yeah. Mia, did we have a chance to get you back on? Okay. Well, I've done enough of these to know there's always something. We'll work with the TSPi team to get Mia on, but maybe we'll just go ahead and, John, I'd love to have your perspectives. Coming from industry, you get a really cool opportunity to work with a lot of different agencies on DevSecOps, and it'd be great to hear your perspectives on what you see across government, and even if you can throw in anything from the commercial side, since you guys are working with a lot of folks.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's we are talking DevOps here, so we have to be agile. So hopefully Mia will join us back in. But I did talk with her beforehand a little bit as well, so I can hopefully touch on some of the things that is that Mia's audio? Or?
Yeah, I think she might be getting on.
Okay.
Mia, I think you've got.
Okay.
I hear you. You might have to drop the phone. I think your camera's working fine.
I have no sound though coming out of my computer at this time. So okay. I'm gonna use the phone and turn the mic off.
Let's just go old school. Okay. Let's just use the phone. It won't be. We'll just go ahead and do that.
Okay.
So, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No problem. We'll adjust. It's one of the things, but yeah, I'd say we're probably 5 to 10 years into the DevOps movement in industry. I think public sector has a lot of unique challenges. Because of the way the vast sprawl that we have, right? In terms of tooling, the pace of innovation, we have a lot of different systems integrators and other teams that we work with. And then, of course, in some of the high sides, right, you have different classifications and then everything's always connected to the internet, right? We've got air-gapped environments and those types of things. With DevSecOps specifically right now, I'd say if you take a step back and look at DevOps in general, it really just is a tool to solve a larger business outcome. And so if you look at some of what the commercial industry is doing, they're adopting a lot of the things from the lean movement. They're doing things like value stream mapping, where you can map out value and try to identify things like waste inside your environment. With DevSecOps, it's a way, especially in public sector, to bring in kind of a secure DevOps practice where you end up kind of baking things a lot of times into the platform, a lot of the things that would be part of compliance or the ATO process into the platform. Some of the things that I'm seeing with the public sector customers is some of the things that we work with customers on to try to help with is that we see customers getting a little bit lost in the weeds with kind of glue code and writing disparate tooling for all sorts of compliance practices and vendors. I would say too, like a little bit, it's kind of a high noise environment right now because there's all sorts of different security vendors and teams coming in and talking to customers and telling sometimes kind of conflicting languages there. But yet I think that one of the things that we're seeing on the bright side is that I do see a large effort in government right now to move from the traditional big bang releases to more of a modern development practices around getting fast feedback from users and then kind of making decisions around pivoted or persevering. A lot of those things that you see if you've read kind of lean startup model or human-centered design, a lot of the things that industry is doing from a development perspective. And some of the challenges of that, though, too, is that contracts aren't necessarily set up in government to do incentivize a path or smooth handoffs, right? And so, in industry, you probably heard of 2 pizza teams. That's how a lot of the DevOps high flyers are writing code and deploying it. And that becomes a challenge with contracts because everyone's not necessarily incentivized to make smooth handoffs in between teams. And I think that's one of the things that I was talking with me about, like what leaders can do, right? So a lot of in industry, they're moving towards APIs as kind of that handoff between teams. And so leaders can help kind of incentivize what those APIs or what that handoff might look like. Another thing that I talked about with Mia, hopefully when she joins back in, she'll be able to touch on this too, is that, I think one of the things that leaders can help with is setting clear goals and then measurements around what success looks like from an end-to-end process. And then, down in the weeds, people can work on things like automation. But a lot of times automation's hard and leaders can help with that too, because a lot of times the hardest part of automation is not actually writing code, but we're talking to complex systems, and even a lot of what we do is in people's heads, and getting those into clear steps that can be written as code can be very hard. And I think sometimes scary too, talking to systems can be hard, especially if there's a lot of different systems. Writing down those steps can really be a challenge. A lot of times too, just from a learning standpoint, we learn very easily, but then we often forget, or things aren't necessarily codified in as part of the culture. So leaders can kind of help with that as well too. One of the things that Red Hat does is kind of think holistically end to end from a measurement. So we'll help kind of create APIs between teams, help customers adopt languages so that they're all speaking the same language between different teams, whether that's the networking team or the operations team or the security team. We'll help them focus on technical debt, and that's a big thing that leaders can help with as well. Prioritizing not just features, but technical debt as well, and then focusing on like the high value items. So we work with helping customers adopt things like this, the state of DevOps support, the 4 key metrics, using those as measurements, helping them avoid snowflakes and kind of the accumulation of technical debt, those types of things. But a lot of DevOps and DevSecOps is kind of the end-to-end flow, thinking of things holistically. If you talk to a lot of the new security folks and the new leaders that are coming in industry right now, they're thinking a lot about not just the initial security practices, but the continuous monitoring and then continuous remediation and kind of the day two part of that. And so I think that's really critical too, because, what we always say, good ops is good security, right? And so what we mean by good ops is that you have infrastructure that you can quickly rebuild. You have infrastructure as code. A lot of times that's containers or an immutable operating system, right? And that's really how you can do anomaly detection, because if you don't have a stable system, you can't monitor it, right? Because you don't know what stable looks like. And that's, I think, kind of where the puck is going for in the future. Do we have Mia back on yet? Or
I think we have Mia. We'll go to her in a second. I got to ask you, since we have a lot of practitioners at higher level and lower level, what do you kind of go into a little depth? And I've heard the term before. I can ask you a lot of great questions, but the two pizza teams, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's an expression, but really what it means is that you have smaller teams, typically about 8 people. And the idea is that you have enough cross-functional skill sets to build an entire product end to end, and at least get it into production. But you're not so big that you start doing things suboptimally, but you're not too small that you don't have all the skill sets that you need to get things out there. And a lot of times, like with the 2 pizza team model, you do have cross-functional aspects of that. So you have someone that understands databases or operating systems or networking. You have all the skill sets you need on that 2 pizza team. But of course, you also need to hand things off to other teams as well, right? And so that's a lot of times where, traditionally in government, that's been a contract and some, other SI or something like that. But a lot of times in industry, that's an API, that might be Kubernetes, or that might be Ansible or something like that, or some other API that might be a cloud API or Terraform, right? And so that's where I think where the government can try to make those handoffs more sustainable, because right now that handoff is a lot of manual work. It's a lot of process, and not necessarily as API driven as would like in commercial.
Yeah, I can definitely ask you some more questions about that, but we have Mia Jordan, and Mia, don't feel too bad. I gave this wonderful keynote, and I realized there was some technical difficulties. After I gave my best stuff, after 20 minutes, they said, you need to do it again. So we worked around this. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Tom.
Yeah, we'll get a little feedback there. So Mia Jordan has been in the federal government for a little bit here. She's currently in a new role. You can Google that. You can find her on LinkedIn. But I got to know her in her last role, which actually it was one of the, I think it was about a year ago, we had a low to no code event, and she was working over at USDA in the rural development category over there. And now you've gone through a transition. You were working at an agency, and then you get onboarded to a new agency. And if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about that transition in your talk. I'd love to hear a little bit about how that worked out when COVID and we're doing DevSecOps over at USDA.
It certainly was difficult. I'll tell you that, and I'm still around day 60 right now in terms of my transition. There's nothing like walking into a new organization where you don't get to see people, walk around and talk to people, and kind of get that mouth to ear interaction, about what they do, how they do what they do. I'll just tell you though that the leadership at my new organization has put some things in place which honestly has made the transition smoother, and it's allowed me to really attempt to get up to speed rather quickly, at least in my last 30 days, in understanding kind of the business of the organization, but also how my particular organization supports the business. So I'm still learning, still growing, and a lot more to learn for sure.
Yeah, and Mia, that's fantastic. One of the things that we talked about before is, we have the DevSecOps movement, and that's going really well. We've had some really good early government leaders like the Mark Schwartzes of the world, and we have Nick Shalon, who spoke earlier. Development of Platform One in the Air Force and the DoD. We also have low to no code platforms, and sometimes it's how do I integrate DevSecOps when I have a low to no code platform, and how do I get all this to work? Can you tell us a little bit about that dynamic? And it seems like in the DevOps community, some of them kind of aren't really, it's not the purity of the art or something when you actually build off of a low to no code platform. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because you've had some success in your career with both things, both methodologies.
Yeah. Sure. So I'll tell you, it wasn't a crawl, walk, run exercise for us. We ended up in a situation where our delivery timeline for many projects were kind of predefined, and we had to figure out a way to move literally at the speed of light to ensure that we could meet those administration priorities. And so it is not ideal how we ended up successful. There were a lot of bruises, and a lot of, after our I'm sorry sessions that occurred. But I'll just say, organizationally, moving to DevSecOps or DevOps, at least for those who run IT organizations, there's some great books out there that you can read. There's the Phoenix Project. There's the DevOps handbook. But I think the thing that I would leave with everyone is that you cannot go it alone as the IT organization. You really have to bring the rest of your organization along, because you are going to essentially not just retool how you do development and how you manage your applications and operations, but kind of all of the processes and all of the stakeholders around that process really need to understand the intended goal, the intended outcome, and where they fit in that picture. And so for us, our kind of DevOps journey started primarily on the development side of the house, and then we tackled kind of our operations and maintenance aspect, where we had to really kind of reimagine how operations was going to work with this new tool set, how we were going to deploy patches, how we were going to kind of insert security along the way. And that's a fundamental piece that often gets missed. In many organizations, you still see where everyone wants to kind of tack on security at the end and not really understand that DevOps is really about that every rotation around the moon is what I call those sprints, right? Every rotation around the moon, that security is, along for the ride. You cannot be successful with them coming in at the end. And so making sure that we had like dynamic and static testing tools as a part of our DevOps journey was critical to our success. There's nothing like waiting until the end to understand that you have surprises waiting for you in critical and high vulnerabilities, right?
Right.
And then I think the other point that I'll make is kind of the what I'll call code analysis as well along the way, kind of understanding the quality of your code. That's a fundamental piece that I see missing in many tool sets, where you've got your requirements, you've got your development environment, your code repository, but we're not kind of checking the checker, so to speak, in terms of the quality of the product that we're taking on. And I think to John's point, what is the technical debt that we're ultimately assuming every time we release, right? Every time we go live, that needs to be well understood, because that as well has to be built into your model, those rotations around the sun, so to speak. So I'll pause there.
Yeah. And John, if you want to add some more, we got a question about technical debt, and Mia touched on it. Do you want to add a little bit more there, which you touched on a little bit in your opening statements, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. If you actually look at some of the studies that have been out there, a lot of the security breaches are human error or customers' faults, and one of the things that I think makes patching and other things traditionally hard is that we don't actually always know what's running in production, right? Because a lot of times things ends up being kind of snowflakes. We didn't necessarily have good infrastructure as code or other good practices around when we released. And so if you go back, Mia mentioned the Phoenix project, but that was actually a modern day rewrite of a book called The Goal, which came out in the 80s. It's a great book on Audible if you get a chance to listen to it. And a lot of it was based around traditional lean manufacturing, like a pull-based architecture and kind of first in, first out, and thinking about things holistically through the flow. But the real work was done around lean, was around a lot of the studies and kind of takeaways from lean wasn't necessarily about the tools and the flow. It was about, they actually built this system, and this kind of the paradox of it was that they created a real learning environment where learning was kind of key and forefront. But the paradox around it was that they had all these constraints in the environment, and the constraints were actually what enabled learning because they had a stable system. When you don't have a stable system, it's incredibly hard to measure anything because the measurements aren't very valid. It's hard to patch things. It's hard to monitor things because everything's kind of moving around in a very unstable way, and you don't necessarily know what the causes are for things like outages. And so going back to your original point, paying down technical debt is a really critical aspect to the improvement of daily work, right? And so I think a lot of times when people, and this is the real challenge with, you start adopting Agile and DevOps, right? And a lot of people need to show progress right away because you're going to have naysayers. It's just part of it. And so the way people try to show progress is features, right? Just features. But you have to prioritize your technical debt too, or in the context of features, you're going to lose out on that. There's actually a really good book called The Flow Framework that we recommend as well. It was one of they keynoted at the DevOps Enterprise Summit this year as well. So that it kind of goes into like the percentages and the methodologies around what your technical debt should be. But in general, I'd say you probably at least 20% of your new code should be focused around better practices or fixing technical debt is kind of a table stakes measurement for it.
Yeah, fantastic. One thing I like to peek behind the curtains a little bit. I know doing development work, you have your CISO group and you know people in charge of ATOing your projects. DevSecOps really just turns all that stuff on its head. What has been the challenges to the security groups in these agencies, and how do they get themselves integrated? It's a completely different way to do this, and what should their role be, in regards to DevSecOps?
Is that to me?
Mia? Yeah, I'll go ahead with Mia. Like what did you do at USDA? Yeah. Sure,
I'll start with that. I mean, I wanted the way that I'll answer the question is to kind of touch upon what John referenced in terms of clear goals and measurements. And so some of those clear goals obviously are around, why we put a CI/CD pipeline in place was really about ensuring compliance, right? Because just as a government entity, we need to make sure that, we're checking the boxes on, 508 compliance, IPv6 compliance, like all those kinds of things, right? Speed, obviously, I'll list as number 2, to move to a truly modular development life cycle. Oversight of vendors, I'll say, is like the third point, where before there are many organizations that have vendors that kind of do development outside of the government environment. And so implementing an open source tool set would allow us to have that immediate oversight of vendors and also have hands-on into the quality of the code, but also the vulnerabilities that potentially might exist. And then you heard me mention before avoiding surprises, and those surprises and that oversight and insight was really key to our security organization, having literally hands-on keyboards and able the ability to see when code was checked in nightly, the scans that would take place, nightly, and those reports then that our CISO and his team would get on a regular basis really improve the communication between the security team and the development team. A lot of times it becomes extremely contentious, but also having an organization has to invest in its practices and the documentation of secure coding practices, right? And how those mechanisms are kind of built into either your SDLC or how you check for those things, you know, along the different stage gates. And so all of those things is ultimately, I think, what allowed our security organization to adapt very quickly and also modify what used to be kind of stale, what I'll call stale processes into a true agile delivery model.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, what you brought up. Even though you're having these contentious arguments, it's better to have them early than wait till the end and then you got to redevelop everything because, you're better off having them along the way than at the end of the project. So very good. Yeah. And John, did you want to add anything to that? Oh, sorry. No, Mia, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you must agree and adopt the mantra of failing fast. Yeah. And so we hear it, but do we do it?
Yep. And John?
Yeah, sure. So, I think if you look at the most important thing in your organization is probably going to be relationships, right? And so DevOps does kind of bring in a lot of the people-centered approach to relationships. So, collaboration, discussing your failures, those types of things. From a security perspective, you really need to build relationships with the security folks from the beginning. And I think what the security folks should be doing is getting away from just the compliance. The compliance and those things, the risk management frameworks should be the table stakes, but looking at the context of how something is used, right? If something's running Windows 95 and it's got 1,000 vulnerabilities, but it's on an embedded board where nobody can touch it or access it, you have to consider the context of that. Moving forward, I think the security folks should work with good practices around, okay, yes, you've done the compliance, the risk management framework, but what's the best practice for that context, right? Continuous monitoring. How are you going to get patches out? Do you have the system that's going to be healthy enough to get those things out and patch at the cadence that matches the context of your system? And look at things more from just what would make sense for that individual system, implement countermeasures around simplification. Maybe their system's too complex for a good security posture, right? Simplify where automation might make sense, where refactoring might make sense, those types of things. But I think the most important thing is the relationship that you have with the security folks. And even a lot of the customers I see that are moving more towards like continuous ATOs or the more advanced ways to get code out, they have built really good relationships with the security teams. And the customers I see that don't have those relationships are the ones that are stuck, even if they can do everything else properly, because they're just going to hit a wall. And so you really have to build those things in from the beginning. That should just be day one, getting feedback from the security teams.
Yeah, and Mia, John started this discussion. We got a question about how do you streamline that ATO process from a friend that will go unmentioned in one of our agencies? How would how did you guys do that at USDA? What's the process for that? Working with the security team, how did you guys get around some of that stuff, as far as that?
Well, I'll tell you that I had the privilege of early on when we were thinking about moving to DevOps as a discipline. I'll just give a shout out to USCIS because they were the leader, the front runner, really in the government, and I had an opportunity, maybe two opportunities, to engage with them and ask questions and learn. But I'll say that so when we kind of started the process, continuous ATOs was something that as a sub agency at USDA, we really had we didn't have the process and infrastructure in place from RD up to the department to make continuous ATOs a reality when we started on the journey. I'll give another quick shout out to Ms. Venus Goodwine. So since her arrival, she has been reimagining the cybersecurity process, and she is certainly a leader in her field as the CISO of USDA in really trying to figure and helping to change the model of security so that we can move to that. So I'll just say from a USDA perspective, we weren't there yet, but there were some great changes made that allowed achieving ATOs quickly and based on the premise of business drives cybersecurity. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I think she actually spoke at the last live event that we had here at ATARC back in March at the DevSecOps Summit. Yeah, she's fantastic. Where do we want to go? I go back to a little bit. One of the challenges we have that seems to be really in federal more than other places. And John, I'm stuck on pizza. The pizza. I had a birthday party last night. It's probably the first time I had pizza in a while. The two pizza teams, but the handoff to different contractors. How do you manage that? You have you just this medley of contractors that have to work and they have different responsibilities. And your two pizza team just got something done and now it's going to another team. And how is this really working? And what are some best practices about getting everybody on? Getting all these disparate teams together and working together and actually completing the project.
Yeah, it's so far I'd say it's one of those things where your mileage may vary, but I think one of the most important things, like if you're making a pyramid of needs, right, for DevOps, like one of the things at the very bottom is people in your relationships, and then after that it's probably measurements, right? And if you can't measure anything, you don't know what success looks like. And that's really where I think leaders need to come in, because I've literally seen handoffs where it's actually one SI on one side, it's the same SI on the other side, but it's a very large SI and they're different teams. They don't actually know each other. They're on contract to do different things. And so even actually it's the same company, they actually have trouble doing the handoff. And this is where I think leaders need to come in, and actually more thought probably needs to come into actually how the contracts are written, and probably more of an API driven fashion for those handoffs. But then that's where we also need to get measurements so we can measure what's working and what's not working. Because if we don't have a stable system, we don't have measurements, then we're just kind of we're just kind of blindly walking through our deployments, right? And so having a stable system is really where kind of the table stakes for DevOps, because that's when we can start to push code faster. That's when we can focus on our constraints. We don't know what our constraints are if we're not even measuring anything, right? And so, you go back to the State of DevOps report, they list these 4 key metrics, right? And so a lot of them required, how fast can you get new code into the system? How fast can you deploy, and those types of things. So it's measuring the system and having fast handoffs between teams is probably the table stakes things where leaders need to come in and kind of facilitate those conversations that need to happen. There's for those of you that like to read books, there's a book called Agile Conversations that's really good on some of the things that can be done there as well. But even like the speaker listener technique, if you're familiar with that, is really helpful. So sometimes if you're talking to people, you're not actually speaking the same language, and it's just kind of like reiterating back, once they're done speaking, you reiterate back what they're said. But even that, I've seen basic things like that can help get to the bottom of, people's problems. But I think in industry, one of the things that they're doing now is value stream mapping, where you actually get everyone in the room to get together and you put a value stream map in. And there's a few big takeaways for it. The first is you build empathy, right? Because you actually see inside that black box of what those other teams are actually doing. But then it also helps eliminate waste. It looks for points where you might be able to get feedback loops faster in the process, engage other people faster in the process, see where the value is inside the flow from end to end. And so we've seen it done in public sector as well a few times, and it's worked really well. But I think we need a lot more of it going forward.
Yeah. And Mia, I think we're running out of time, but you'll have the last word on this topic. I'm really curious about what you're going to say.
Yeah, you saw me nodding violently over here. I'll just say this to kind of answer that question. The two pizza teams is a great analogy to kind of frame this discussion. You know, it's probably even more than that, probably 4 pizza teams, right, that ultimately can make it successful. But I'll say this to those technology leaders. You really have to understand the maturity of your organization in order to make this work. You know, you may have different layers in your technology stack where you have very mature teams. What has worked for me at my previous agency was that the government acted as that system integrator because to really kind of tamp down the noise, right, between vendors. And where we acted as that system integrator was at that API layer was really to make sure that, you know, what was happening at the UI ultimately was going to flow correctly to back-end systems. And so I'll just stress that, you know, really understanding where you need to grow your staff is critical to getting to a place where you can really kind of take DevOps on by the horn, so to speak, and making that investment early versus like me, where, you know, I was given a 3-month window to get an application out, and I had to, you know, you make some mistakes. And so if you have the time and the luxury of not having a lot on your plate, this is the time to really kind of start taking that journey slowly and thinking about the strategy to get to your end state.
Great. Well, that'll be the final word. Thank you, Mia and John. And that was a great discussion. Went by.
Great presentation. That was terrific. I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion and the programming and will come away from today's sessions with some valuable insights and ideas. Again, I think I want to thank all of the presenters, all of the moderators. This was really a terrific exchange of information. Now let's bring back on board the founder and CEO of TSPi for a few closing thoughts. Vishal, welcome back on board.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you again to all of our federal speakers, participants, and certainly the sponsors. What a great discussion. It's pretty clear that the future of federal technology is certainly poised to continue to rapidly evolve. I think that's part of the reason why we love what we do, is that each day brings a new set of challenges that sometimes stumble us, but as they say, future remains bright, and we come up with solutions that we feel proud about. So with that, I hope our next Public Sector Series event next year will be in person. And I personally, and on behalf of everybody at TSPi, look forward to welcoming all of you to that. Thank you again, and have a great day.